The envelope in my mailbox was bright yellow, like someone had decided neon was the perfect color for ruining a Tuesday afternoon. I stood there in my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, holding what I knew before even opening. It was going to be another complaint from the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association. My name is Keith Novak, and I had been living in this cookie-cutter neighborhood for exactly 8 months, which apparently was 7.5 months too long to maintain my sanity. I ripped open the envelope and pulled out the letter, my eyes scanning the overly formal language that these people seemed to love. A parking violation. $250 for parking my truck in front of my house for more than the allowed 4-hour window. I felt my jaw clench as I read through the details. The violation had occurred 3 days ago, on Saturday morning, when I had parked my Ford F-250 on the street directly in front of my property. What the letter failed to mention, what these bureaucratic nightmare people had completely ignored, was why I had been parked there. I had been clearing the fire hydrant that sits at the corner of my lot, the one that had been completely buried under overgrown desert brush and decorative rocks that someone, probably the HOA's own landscaping company, had piled around it. The thing was invisible, a genuine safety hazard. And I had spent 4.5 hours on a Saturday morning with hedge trimmers, a shovel and work gloves, making sure that if there was ever a fire in our neighborhood, the firefighters could actually access it. I walked inside my house, threw my keys on the kitchen counter, and immediately pulled out my phone. The HOA office number was already in my contacts, unfortunately. This was not my first rodeo with these people. I dialed and waited through 3 rings before someone picked up. Saguaro Heights HOA, this is Brenda speaking. Hi Brenda, this is Keith Novak from 4782 Desert Vista Drive. I just received a parking citation that I need to dispute. There was a pause, and I could hear typing in the background. Let me pull up your account, Mr. Novak. Okay, yes, I see the citation here. $250 for extended street parking. Right, except I was parked there because I was clearing the fire hydrant on my property, the one that was completely hidden and inaccessible. I was doing community service, essentially, and now I am getting fined for it. More typing. I see. Well, Mr. Novak, the parking regulations are quite clear. No vehicle can be parked on the street for more than 4 hours between the hours of 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. These rules apply regardless of the reason for parking. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Brenda, I understand the rule exists. What I am saying is that the reason I was there was to fix a safety violation that the HOA itself created. That fire hydrant was invisible. If there had been an emergency, people could have died. I understand your frustration, Mr. Novak, but I cannot simply dismiss citations. You would need to submit a formal appeal to the board. They meet every other Thursday evening. Fine. When is the next meeting? This coming Thursday, actually. 7 p.m. at the community center. You will need to submit your appeal in writing at least 48 hours in advance. I looked at my watch. It was Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon. So I have until tomorrow at 7 p.m. to submit something in writing. That is correct. Great. I will have it to you by tomorrow afternoon. I hung up and immediately opened my laptop. If these people wanted formal, I would give them formal. I spent the next 2 hours crafting what I thought was a reasonable, detailed explanation of the situation. I included photos I had taken on my phone of the fire hydrant before and after I cleared it. The before photos showed a hydrant almost completely obscured by overgrown desert sage, decorative boulders, and what looked like it might have been an attempt at xeriscaping that had gone completely wild. The after photos showed a clearly visible, accessible hydrant with a 3-foot clearance radius, which I had looked up was the requirement according to the Scottsdale Fire Department. I printed everything out, put it in a folder, and drove it over to the HOA office the next afternoon. Brenda took the folder with a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes and told me I would be added to the agenda for Thursday's meeting. Thursday evening came faster than I wanted. I put on a button-down shirt and jeans, trying to look presentable without looking like I was trying too hard. The community center was a beige stucco building that matched every other building in the neighborhood, with desert landscaping out front and a parking lot that was already half full when I arrived at 6:45. Inside, the main room had been set up with rows of folding chairs facing a long table at the front. 5 people sat at the table, name plates in front of each of them. I recognized a few faces from neighborhood events I had been guilted into attending. The woman in the center, the one with the largest name plate reading Patricia Whitmore, President, was someone I had unfortunately encountered before. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with blonde hair cut in that specific style that seemed to be required for HOA board members, and she wore a blazer that looked like it cost more than my mortgage payment. I took a seat in the 3rd row and waited as other residents filtered in. The meeting started exactly at 7, with Patricia banging a small gavel that seemed excessive for a homeowners association meeting. Good evening, everyone. I call this meeting of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association to order. We have quite a bit on the agenda tonight, so let us proceed efficiently. First, we will hear from residents who have submitted formal appeals or complaints. She looked down at a piece of paper in front of her. Our first appeal is from Keith Novak regarding a parking citation. Mr. Novak, please come forward. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, suddenly very aware of every eye on me. Patricia gestured to a spot next to the table where I assumed I was supposed to stand. Mr. Novak, you have 3 minutes to present your appeal. Please proceed. I cleared my throat. Thank you. I am appealing a $250 parking citation I received for parking my truck in front of my house on Saturday, 3 days ago. I was parked there for approximately 4.5 hours, which I understand violates the 4-hour street parking limit. However, the reason I was parked there was because I was clearing the fire hydrant at the corner of my property, which had become completely inaccessible due to overgrown vegetation and decorative rocks. I pulled out my phone and showed the before and after photos. As you can see in these photos, the hydrant was invisible before I cleared it. This is a serious safety hazard. In the event of a fire, emergency responders would not have been able to locate or access it quickly. I spent my Saturday morning fixing this problem, and I believe that work should be recognized as a service to the community rather than punished with a fine. Patricia took my phone and looked at the photos, then passed it down to the other board members. After about 30 seconds of silence that felt like an hour, she handed my phone back to me. Mr. Novak, while we appreciate your initiative in clearing the hydrant, the parking regulations exist for the safety and order of our community. Allowing exceptions, even for seemingly good reasons, would set a precedent that could lead to chaos. The board votes to uphold the citation. The fine stands at $250, due within 30 days. I felt my face flush. You are kidding me right now. I just showed you that I was fixing a safety violation that your own landscaping company probably created, and you are still going to fine me. Mr. Novak, I would ask you to please maintain a respectful tone. The landscaping in our community is maintained according to HOA standards, and if you had concerns about the fire hydrant's accessibility, You should have submitted a request to the board rather than taking matters into your own hands. A request that would have taken how long? Weeks? Months? Meanwhile, that hydrant sits inaccessible and people are at risk. Another board member, a man whose name plate read Douglas Chen, treasurer, leaned forward. Mr. Novak, we understand your concern, but the process exists for a reason. We cannot have residents unilaterally deciding what work needs to be done in common areas. The hydrant is not in a common area. It is on my property line, and it is a fire safety issue, not a landscaping preference. Patricia's expression hardened. Mr. Novak, the decision has been made. The fine stands. Now, if you will please take your seat, we have other matters to attend to. I wanted to argue more, but I could see it was pointless. These people had already made up their minds before I even walked into the room. I returned to my seat, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The meeting continued with other mundane HOA business. Someone wanted to paint their front door a different shade of tan and needed approval. Someone else was complaining about a neighbor's Christmas lights still being up in January. It was mind-numbing, and I was about to leave when something Patricia said caught my attention. And finally, I want to remind everyone that the HOA has installed new decorative landscaping around all fire hydrants in the community. We believe this enhances the aesthetic appeal of our neighborhood while maintaining our desert landscape theme. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I am sorry. Did you just say you installed decorative landscaping around the fire hydrants? Patricia looked at me with obvious irritation. Yes, Mr. Novak, as I just stated. So the HOA deliberately landscaped around the fire hydrants, which is what made them inaccessible in the first place, and now you are fining me for clearing one. Mr. Novak, our landscaping is in full compliance with all regulations. No, it is not. The Scottsdale Fire Department requires a 3-foot clearance radius around all fire hydrants. I looked it up. Your decorative landscaping violates that requirement. The room had gone quiet. Other residents were looking between Patricia and me with interest. Patricia's face had turned a concerning shade of red. Mr. Novak, I assure you that all HOA projects are reviewed and approved by the appropriate authorities. Then you would not mind if I contacted the fire department to come inspect the hydrants in our neighborhood, would you? Patricia's jaw tightened. You can contact whomever you wish, Mr. Novak, but I suspect you will find everything is in order. Now this meeting is adjourned. She banged her gavel with more force than necessary, and the board members quickly gathered their papers and left through a back door. I stood there for a moment, then pulled out my phone and did exactly what I had threatened. I called the non-emergency number for the Scottsdale Fire Department. The next morning, I got a call from Fire Marshal Rodriguez. I explained the situation to him, sent him the photos I had taken, and gave him the address of our community. He told me he would send an inspector out within the next few days to assess the fire hydrants in Saguaro Heights. 3 days later, I was working from home when I noticed a white SUV with Scottsdale Fire Department markings driving slowly through the neighborhood. I watched from my window as the inspector stopped at various fire hydrants, taking photos and notes. When he got to the one I had cleared, he spent several minutes examining it before moving on to others. That afternoon, I received an email from Fire Marshal Rodriguez. The inspection had revealed that 16 of the 18 fire hydrants in Saguaro Heights were in violation of clearance requirements due to decorative landscaping. The HOA had been issued a notice of violation and had 30 days to bring all hydrants into compliance or face fines of $500 per day per hydrant. I sat back in my chair and allowed myself, a small smile. Maybe I was petty, but after the way Patricia and her board had treated me, this felt like justice. The following Tuesday, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was not yellow. It was white, and the tone was considerably different. Dear Mr. Novak, it has come to our attention that you contacted the Scottsdale Fire Department regarding fire hydrant accessibility in our community. While we appreciate resident vigilance regarding safety matters, we must inform you that your actions have resulted in significant unexpected expenses for the HOA. The fire department has required us to clear all fire hydrants within 30 days, which will necessitate emergency landscaping work costing an estimated $40,000. As a result, the board is implementing a special assessment of $200 per household to cover these costs. Additionally, your parking citation fine has been increased to $500 due to the administrative burden your appeal caused. Please remit payment within 30 days. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my blood pressure rise a little higher. They were actually trying to blame me for their own violation of fire safety codes and punish me with an increased fine. This was beyond unreasonable. This was retaliation. I called my friend Marcus, who happened to be a lawyer. Marcus and I had gone to Arizona State University together and had stayed close even after he went to law school, and I went into software development. I explained the entire situation to him over the phone. Keith, buddy, you have got a pretty solid case here for HOA harassment and retaliation. The fact that they increased your fine after you reported a legitimate safety violation to the authorities is textbook retaliation, and trying to pass the cost of fixing their own violation on to homeowners through a special assessment is questionable at best. So what do I do? First, do not pay the increased fine. Second, document everything. Every letter, every email, every interaction with the board. Third, I am going to draft a letter to the HOA on your behalf explaining that their actions constitute retaliation and that you are prepared to take legal action if necessary. Is this going to cost me a fortune in legal fees? Marcus laughed. For you, I will do the letter for free. If this actually goes to court, we can work something out. But honestly, I think once they get a letter from an attorney, they will back down. Most HOA boards are just petty tyrants who fold the second they face real consequences. 2 days later, Marcus sent me a draft of the letter he had written. It was beautiful, professional but firm, laying out exactly how the HOA had violated my rights as a homeowner and citing specific Arizona statutes regarding HOA governance and retaliation against residents. He sent it certified mail to both the HOA office and to Patricia Whitmore personally. I expected things to calm down after that. I was wrong. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday, and I received an email stating that there would be a special discussion regarding resident Keith Novak and his ongoing violations of community standards. I forwarded the email to Marcus immediately. They are really doubling down on this, he said when I called him. Are you planning to attend the meeting? I think I have to. If I do not show up, they will probably vote to do something even more ridiculous. I will come with you. They need to see that you have legal representation. Thursday evening, Marcus and I walked into the community center together. The room was more crowded than the last meeting, with at least 30 residents in attendance. Word had apparently spread about the special assessment and the fire hydrant situation. We took seats in the front row. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m., her expression stony as she looked directly at me. Good evening. Before we proceed with regular business, we need to address a serious matter affecting our entire community. Resident Keith Novak has taken it upon himself to report our community to the fire department, resulting in significant and unexpected costs to the HOA. The board has determined that a special assessment is necessary to cover these emergency expenses. A woman in the back raised her hand. "Excuse me, but why are we being charged for the HOA's mistake? If the fire hydrants were not up to code, that is not Keith's fault." Patricia's smile was tight. The landscaping was professionally installed and was intended to beautify our community. The fire department's interpretation of the clearance requirements is stricter than we had been previously informed. Marcus stood up. "Excuse me, my name is Marcus Chen, and I am Mr. Novak's attorney. I would like to clarify a few points for everyone here. First, the fire department's clearance requirements are not subject to interpretation. They are clearly defined in both city and state fire codes. Second, the HOA board approved and paid for landscaping that violated those codes, which makes this a board error, not a resident-caused expense. Third, increasing Mr. Novak's parking fine and implementing a special assessment after he reported a safety violation to the proper authorities constitutes retaliation, which violates Arizona HOA statutes. The room erupted in conversation. Multiple residents started talking at once, some directing questions at Patricia, others discussing among themselves. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! Please, everyone, order!" Douglas Chen, the treasurer, leaned over to whisper something to Patricia. She listened, her face growing redder by the second, then turned back to address the room. "The board will take a brief recess to discuss these matters. Please remain seated." The 5 board members filed out through the back door, leaving the rest of us in uncomfortable silence. Marcus leaned over to me. "That went better than expected. I think they are realizing they are in over their heads." After about 15 minutes, the board returned. Patricia sat down heavily in her chair and cleared her throat. After further discussion, the board has decided to table the special assessment pending further review. We will be consulting with the HOA's legal counsel to determine the best path forward. A man in the second row stood up. "What about Keith's fine? Are you dropping that?" Patricia's expression could have curdled milk. "The parking citation fine will be reduced back to the original $250. However, the citation itself stands." Marcus stood up again. "With all due respect, my client should not be paying any fine whatsoever. He was parked on the street while performing a service that benefited the entire community and corrected a safety hazard that the HOA itself created. Upholding this citation, even at the reduced amount, is still retaliatory in nature. Mr. Chen, the parking regulations exist for everyone's benefit. We cannot simply ignore violations because someone claims they were doing something helpful." An older woman I recognized from a few houses down stood up. "Patricia, this is ridiculous. Keith cleared a fire hydrant. He made our neighborhood safer. And instead of thanking him, you are fining him and trying to make the rest of us pay for fixing the HOA's mistake. I move that we vote to recall the current board and elect new members who actually have the community's interests at heart." The room exploded with voices again, many of them agreeing with the woman. Patricia looked genuinely shocked. Douglas Chen started frantically flipping through a binder, presumably looking for the procedures for a board recall. "That is not how this works," Patricia practically shouted. "You cannot just call for a recall vote in the middle of a meeting." Marcus was trying not to smile. "Actually, according to the Arizona Planned Communities Act, homeowners can petition for a recall election with signatures from at least 25% of the voting members. If there are enough residents here who are dissatisfied with the current board's performance, they have every right to begin that process." Patricia stood up abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned. Any further business will be conducted through proper channels." She grabbed her papers and stormed out, followed by 3 of the other board members. Only Douglas Chen remained, looking uncomfortable. "Look, for what it is worth, I voted against increasing your fine. I think this whole situation has been handled poorly." Patricia has a tendency to take things personally, and once she decides someone is an enemy, she does not let it go. "So what happens now?" I asked. Douglas shrugged. "Honestly, probably nothing good. Patricia is not going to back down, and based on what I just saw, a significant number of residents are angry enough to actually follow through on a recall. We might be looking at a complete board restructure. Over the next 2 weeks, things in Saguaro Heights got messy." The woman who had called for the recall, whose name I learned was Helen Santiago, started a petition and got it signed by over 40% of the households in the community. The required special meeting for a recall vote was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Meanwhile, the HOA hired a landscaping company to clear all the fire hydrants in the community, which cost significantly less than the $40,000 Patricia had quoted. Turned out when you did not try to rush things through in an emergency, prices came down substantially. I still had not paid my parking fine. Marcus had sent another letter to the HOA stating that the fine was unwarranted and that any attempt to collect it would be met with a counter-suit for harassment and retaliation. The HOA sent back a terse response saying that the fine was valid and that failure to pay would result in a lien on my property. "They are bluffing," Marcus told me. "They are not going to put a lien on your property over a $250 parking fine that they know they will lose in court. It would cost them more in legal fees than the fine is worth." But they did not back down, and neither did I. The situation had become a standoff, with both sides waiting to see who would blink first. The recall vote meeting was on a Saturday morning, which meant maximum attendance. The community center was packed, with at least 80 residents crammed into a space designed for maybe 50. Marcus came with me again, and we stood against the back wall since all the seats were taken. Helen Santiago stood at the front of the room with a microphone. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, we are here to vote on whether to recall the current HOA board and elect new members. Before we vote, I want to give each current board member a chance to speak if they would like to defend their positions." Patricia stood up immediately. "I have served as president of this HOA for 6 years. In that time, we have maintained property values, improved our community amenities, and kept our neighborhood beautiful. One disgruntled resident's vendetta should not undermine years of dedicated service." She was trying to make this about me, which Marcus had warned she might do. Helen did not let her get away with it. "Patricia, with respect, this is not about one resident. This is about a pattern of poor decision-making and retaliation against homeowners who question the board's actions. The fire hydrant situation is just the most recent example. Several residents have come forward with stories about unreasonable fines, denied reasonable requests, and a general attitude of hostility from the board toward the people they are supposed to serve. That is simply not true." Patricia's voice was shrill now. "We follow all the rules and regulations. We do what is best for the community. You installed landscaping that violated fire safety codes," someone shouted from the crowd, "and then you tried to make us pay to fix it." The room descended into chaos again, with multiple people shouting at once. Helen tried to restore order, but it took several minutes before people quieted down enough for the vote to proceed. The vote itself was done by secret ballot, with each household getting 1 vote. It took about 30 minutes to collect and count all the ballots. When Helen announced the results, Her voice was clear and firm. By a vote of 68 to 14, the motion to recall the current board passes. We will now hold nominations for new board members. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, her face pale. The other board members looked shell-shocked, except for Douglas Chen, who actually looked relieved. The nomination process was surprisingly quick. Helen was nominated and accepted a position. A retired engineer named Frank Palmer was nominated for another position. A few other names were thrown out, including mine, which I immediately declined. I had no interest in being part of any HOA board, even a reformed one. By the end of the meeting, a new 5-member board had been elected. Helen was voted in as the new president. The first order of business she addressed was my parking fine. I moved that we dismiss the parking citation against Keith Novak. He was performing a community service, and penalizing him for that is both counterproductive and, as his attorney has pointed out, potentially illegal. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. Just like that, after 6 weeks of fighting, my fine was dismissed, but the story did not end there. 2 days later, I was working from home when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find 2 people in business casual attire, a man and a woman, holding clipboards. "Mr. Keith Novak?" the woman asked. "Yes. I am Investigator Diaz and this is Investigator Thompson. We are with the Arizona Corporation Commission, HOA Division. We received a complaint regarding the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association and their handling of finances. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?" I invited them in, confused. I did not file a complaint about finances. I had an issue with a parking citation, but that has been resolved. Investigator Diaz nodded. "We understand." The complaint we received was from Douglas Chen, who served as treasurer on the previous board. He has alleged that the former board president, Patricia Whitmore, was misappropriating HOA funds for personal use. My eyes widened. Seriously? We cannot discuss the details of an ongoing investigation, but we understand you had significant interactions with Miss Whitmore and the previous board. We wanted to get your perspective on how the board operated. I spent the next hour telling them everything, from my first fine to the special assessment threat to the recall vote. They took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about how decisions were made and who had access to HOA accounts. After they left, I immediately called Marcus. "You are not going to believe this. The Corporation Commission is investigating Patricia for misappropriating HOA funds." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That actually makes a lot of sense. The way she was so aggressive about that special assessment, trying to rush it through without proper review, that has always struck me as suspicious. If she was skimming money and the fire hydrant expenses were going to expose a budget shortfall, she might have been trying to cover it up." Douglas seemed like a decent guy. I am glad he came forward. Douglas probably realized he could be held liable too if he knew about financial irregularities and did not report them. Better to cooperate with investigators than risk being charged as an accomplice. The investigation took 3 months. During that time, the new HOA board under Helen's leadership was like night and day compared to Patricia's regime. They sent out a newsletter explaining the fire hydrant situation, apologized for the confusion and poor handling of the issue, and implemented new policies for how residents could report safety concerns without fear of retaliation. Helen even organized a community barbecue where she publicly thanked me for bringing the fire hydrant issue to light. It was embarrassing but also kind of nice to feel appreciated instead of attacked. In late April, Marcus called me with news. Patricia Whitmore has been charged with felony theft and fraud. The investigators found that she had been diverting HOA funds into a personal account for over 3 years. The total amount is somewhere around $120,000. How did she hide that much missing money? According to Douglas, who testified as part of his cooperation agreement, Patricia handled all the financial reporting to the board and homeowners. She would inflate expense reports, claim emergency repairs that never happened, and pocket the difference. The fire hydrant situation was actually what exposed her, because when the real landscaping bill came in at $12,000, instead of the $40,000 she had claimed it would cost, Douglas started digging into other expenses and found the discrepancies. So me clearing that fire hydrant basically brought down a criminal operation. Marcus laughed. In a roundabout way, yes, though I am pretty sure that was not what you had in mind when you spent your Saturday morning with hedge trimmers. Patricia's case went to trial in September. I was called to testify about my interactions with her and the board, specifically regarding the parking citation and the special assessment threat. It was surreal sitting in a courtroom describing HOA meetings while prosecutors argued that Patricia had used her position to steal from her neighbors. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days before finding Patricia guilty on multiple counts of theft and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, though according to Marcus, the chances of the community ever seeing most of that money were slim. In the aftermath, Saguaro Heights actually became a pretty decent place to live. Helen and the new board ran things transparently, with monthly financial reports posted online and board meetings that focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. The parking regulations were revised to allow for longer street parking when residents were doing yard work or community service tasks. The fire hydrants remained clear and visible, with the new board implementing quarterly inspections to make sure they stayed accessible. The fire department even sent a letter commending the community for its commitment to safety. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about standing up to petty tyrants and the importance of documentation. Every photo I took, every email I saved, every interaction I recorded had been essential in fighting back against the HOA's retaliation and eventually exposing Patricia's crimes. One Saturday morning in November, almost exactly a year after I had first cleared that fire hydrant, I was outside washing my truck when Helen walked by with her dog. "Morning, Keith. Nice day, is it not?" "Sure is. How are things going with the board?" "Good. We finally got approval to renovate the community center. Real upgrades this time, not just cosmetic stuff that cost a fortune. And we are under budget for the year, which means we might actually be able to lower HOA dues next year instead of raising them." "That is great to hear." Helen paused, her expression turning serious. "You know, Keith, I never properly thanked you for everything that happened. If you had not pushed back against Patricia, if you had just paid that fine and stayed quiet, she would probably still be stealing from all of us. You standing up to her set everything else in motion." I shrugged, feeling a little uncomfortable with the praise. I was just annoyed about getting fined for doing the right thing. I did not set out to expose an embezzlement scheme. "Maybe not, but you did it anyway." "Sometimes the right thing happens because someone is too stubborn to let injustice slide." She grinned. "That stubbornness is a gift, even if it does not feel like it when you are in the middle of fighting." After she left, I thought about her words. She was right, in a way. I had been stubborn. I could have just paid the stupid fine, grumbled about it to my friends, and moved on with my life. But something about the unfairness of it, the way Patricia had dismissed legitimate safety concerns, and then retaliated against me for doing the right thing, had pushed me to fight back. That stubbornness, that refusal to accept being punished for helping, had led to a chain of events that ultimately benefited the entire community. The fire hydrants were safe. A thief had been caught and punished. The HOA was now run by people who actually cared about serving homeowners rather than wielding power over them. I finished washing my truck and looked over at the fire hydrant on the corner of my property. It sat there, bright red and clearly visible, surrounded by a neat 3-foot clearance radius of gravel. Such a simple thing, really, just a piece of municipal infrastructure. But it had become the catalyst for everything that followed. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Lunch next week. I want to hear about this new project you are working on." I smiled and texted back my agreement. Marcus and I had grown even closer through all of this, bonding over strategy sessions and legal discussions. He had refused to charge me for any of his work, saying that taking down HOA corruption was its own reward. The Arizona sun beat down on my driveway, and I could feel the heat radiating off the concrete even though it was November. I went inside, grabbed a cold drink from the fridge and settled onto my couch. My laptop sat on the coffee table, open to a half-finished software project, but I found myself thinking about the past year instead. The thing about HOAs that most people do not realize until they are stuck in one is how much power they have over your daily life. They can tell you what color to paint your house, what kind of mailbox you can have, whether you can park in your own driveway. And when that power falls into the wrong hands, when it is wielded by someone like Patricia who sees the position as a throne rather than a service role, it can make your life miserable. But the flip side, which I had learned through Helen and the new board, is that HOAs do not have to be terrible. When run by reasonable people who actually care about the community rather than their own egos, they can be genuinely beneficial. Shared maintenance costs, organized community events, protecting property values without being draconian about it. The difference was not in the structure itself, but in the people running it and the willingness of homeowners to hold those people accountable. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened the door to find a young couple standing there, both probably in their late 20s. The woman was holding a baby, and the man had a folder in his hand. "Hi, sorry to bother you. I am Eric, and this is my wife Jennifer. We are thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood, and the realtor mentioned that there had been some HOA issues but that things were better now. We saw you sitting outside earlier and thought we would ask a resident directly what it is like living here." I invited them in and spent the next 30 minutes telling them the whole story. I did not sugarcoat the problems we had faced with Patricia and the old board, but I also made sure they understood how much things had improved. I showed them the HOA's new website, which had transparent financial reports and meeting minutes posted regularly. I gave them Helen's contact information so they could reach out to the current board president directly. "Honestly," I told them as they were leaving, "I almost moved out at one point because Patricia made living here so miserable, but I am glad I stayed and fought instead. Now this is actually a pretty great place to live. The neighbors are friendly, the new board is reasonable, and the community feels like a community instead of a police state." Jennifer smiled. "That is really good to hear. The house we are looking at is beautiful, but we have heard so many HOA horror stories. It is nice to know that problems can actually be fixed if people are willing to stand up for what is right." After they left, I realized that was the real lesson from all of this. Problems can be fixed if people are willing to stand up for what is right. It was not easy. It took time, effort, stress, and the willingness to become unpopular with the powers that be. But it was possible. I thought about all the people who had supported me through the fight. Marcus, who had provided free legal advice and representation. Helen, who had organized the recall effort. Douglas, who had blown the whistle on Patricia's theft despite the personal risk. All the neighbors who had signed the recall petition and voted for change. None of us could have done it alone, but together we had transformed our community. The rest of the weekend passed quietly. I worked on my software project, went for a run along the desert trails near the neighborhood, and had dinner with some neighbors on Sunday evening. It was normal, boring, and completely wonderful after the chaos of the past year. Monday morning, I was checking my email when I saw a message from the Scottsdale Fire Department. It was from Fire Marshal Rodriguez, the same person I had initially contacted about the fire hydrants. Mr. Novak, I wanted to reach out personally to thank you for your diligence in reporting the fire hydrant accessibility issues in your community. As a result of your actions and the subsequent corrections made by your HOA, we have implemented a city-wide audit of fire hydrant accessibility in all HOA communities. So far, we have identified and corrected violations in 12 additional neighborhoods, potentially saving lives in the event of an emergency. Your willingness to speak up has had a positive impact far beyond your own community. Thank you for being a responsible citizen and caring about public safety. I read the email 3 times, a strange feeling swelling in my chest. Pride, maybe, mixed with a sense of purpose. What had started as a frustrating Saturday morning project and turned into a nightmare HOA battle had ultimately resulted in making multiple neighborhoods safer. I forwarded the email to Marcus with a simple message. Thought you would want to see this. He responded within minutes. This is amazing, Keith. Seriously, you should be proud. I sat back in my chair and looked out my office window at the desert landscape beyond my backyard. The morning sun was turning the sky shades of orange and pink, illuminating the saguaro cacti that dotted the hills in the distance. Arizona was beautiful in its own harsh way, and Scottsdale had become home despite the rocky start. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off. I wrote a detailed post on the Saguaro Heights Community Forum explaining everything that had happened, from the initial parking citation to Patricia's arrest and conviction. I included advice for other residents who might face similar HOA issues in the future. Document everything, know your rights, do not be afraid to seek legal counsel, and remember that HOA boards work for the homeowners, not the other way around. The response was overwhelming. Within a few hours, I had dozens of comments thanking me for sharing the story and asking questions about specific aspects of HOA law and homeowner rights. Several people shared their own experiences with difficult HOA boards, and a few asked if I would be willing to speak at the next community meeting about how to recognize and report potential HOA fraud. I agreed, though public speaking was not exactly my favorite activity. If my experience could help other people avoid or overcome similar situations, it was worth the discomfort. The community meeting where I spoke was in early December. The room was full again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. People were engaged and asking thoughtful questions rather than shouting at each other. Helen moderated, keeping the discussion productive and on track. I talked about red flags to watch for, boards that are secretive about finances, presidents who make unilateral decisions without consulting other board members, retaliation against homeowners who ask questions or file complaints. I explained the importance of reviewing HOA financial statements and attending meetings even when nothing controversial was happening, because that was how you caught problems before they became crises. After the meeting, multiple people came up to thank me personally. One older man shook my hand and said, "You know, I served on the board back in the early 2000s when this community was first built. We always tried to run things fairly, but over the years, I saw it change. Patricia and her group turned it into something ugly. I am glad you had the guts to stand up to her. Not everyone would have." His words stuck with me. Not everyone would have. But someone needed to. In any community, in any organization, there need to be people willing to call out wrongdoing even when it is uncomfortable or risky. Otherwise, the Patricia Whitmores of the world run unchecked, wielding power over others and enriching themselves at their neighbors' expense. As winter settled over Scottsdale and the holidays approached, life in Saguaro Heights continued to improve. The new board organized a community-wide holiday lights contest that was judged on creativity and effort rather than strict adherence to approved color schemes. People actually decorated their houses with enthusiasm instead of fear of fines. On Christmas Eve, I was surprised by a knock on my door. I opened it to find a group of neighbors standing on my porch, including Helen, Frank Palmer from the board, and several families I had gotten to know over the past few months. "We wanted to give you this," Helen said, handing me a wrapped box. "Just a little something to say thank you." Inside was a plaque that read, "To Keith Novak, who proved that one person standing up for what is right can change everything. With gratitude from your neighbors at Saguaro Heights." I felt my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You guys did not have to do this." "Yes, we did," Helen said firmly. "What you did mattered, Keith. Do not forget that." They stayed for a while and we ended up having an impromptu holiday gathering in my living room. Someone had brought cookies, someone else had hot cider, and we spent the evening talking and laughing like people who genuinely liked each other rather than people forced to coexist by property lines. As I closed the door after the last neighbor left, I looked at the plaque in my hands. A year ago, I had been furious and frustrated, convinced I had made a mistake buying a house in an HOA community. Now, standing in my living room on Christmas Eve, surrounded by the lingering warmth of neighborly goodwill, I realized how much had changed. The fire hydrant I had cleared on that long ago Saturday morning was still visible through my front window, a small beacon of red in the desert landscaping. It was such a mundane thing, really, just a piece of municipal equipment. But it had become a symbol of something larger. The importance of doing the right thing even when it is inconvenient, the power of standing up to injustice, and the possibility of positive change when people come together for a common purpose. I hung the plaque on my wall, right next to my office door where I would see it every day. A reminder that my actions mattered, that stubbornness in the service of justice was a virtue, and that community was not just about shared property lines, but about shared values and mutual support. The new year came, and with it, continued improvements to Saguaro Heights. The renovated community center opened in February with new meeting spaces, updated bathrooms, and a small gym that residents could use. The board had managed the project efficiently and under budget, a stark contrast to Patricia's financially chaotic reign. In March, I attended a city council meeting where Fire Marshal Rodriguez presented data on the city-wide fire hydrant audit. He mentioned my initial report specifically, crediting it with starting the audit program. The council passed a new ordinance requiring annual fire hydrant accessibility inspections for all HOA communities, with fines for non-compliance. Sitting in that council chamber, listening to city officials discuss policy changes that had originated from my phone call, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what civic engagement looked like. Not grand gestures or running for office necessarily, but paying attention, speaking up when something was wrong, and following through even when it got difficult. Marcus met me for lunch after the council meeting. "You know what I find most interesting about this whole thing?" he said between bites of his sandwich. "Patricia probably thought she was untouchable. 6 years as HOA president, nobody questioning her decisions, money flowing into her pocket without anyone noticing. And then one guy gets annoyed about a parking ticket and her entire scheme collapses." I was not trying to expose an embezzlement scheme. I just wanted the fine dismissed. "I know, and that is exactly my point. You did not set out to be a hero or a whistleblower. You just refused to accept an unjust punishment." But that refusal, that basic insistence on fairness, ended up revealing a much deeper problem. It makes you wonder how many other HOAs, how many other organizations, have similar issues that nobody has bothered to look into because it is easier to just pay the fine and move on. His words resonated with me. How many people had Patricia fined over the years for minor violations or made-up infractions? How many had just paid rather than fighting? And by paying, by accepting the injustice, they had inadvertently enabled her to continue stealing and abusing her power. I was not special or particularly brave. I had just been stubborn enough to say no when everyone expected me to comply. That stubbornness had made all the difference. As spring turned to summer in Scottsdale, with temperatures climbing back into the triple digits, I found myself more engaged with the community than I had ever been. I volunteered to help with the HOA's new community garden project, worked with Frank Palmer on updating the community's emergency preparedness plan, and even joined a neighborhood watch program that Helen had organized. The irony was not lost on me. A year earlier, I would have told anyone who asked that I hated HOAs and regretted buying in an HOA community. Now, I was actively participating in community governance and actually enjoying it. The difference was entirely about who was in charge and how power was wielded. Patricia's trial and conviction had taught everyone in Saguaro Heights an important lesson about accountability. The new board operated under constant scrutiny from engaged homeowners who now paid attention to financial reports and asked questions at meetings. It was checks and balances on a micro scale, and it worked. In August, I got an unexpected email from a reporter at the Arizona Republic, the state's largest newspaper. She was writing a story about HOA reform and had heard about what happened in Saguaro Heights. Would I be willing to be interviewed? I hesitated. I had no desire for publicity or to be the face of HOA reform. But I also recognized that telling the story publicly might help other homeowners who were dealing with similar situations. After talking it over with Marcus and Helen, I agreed to the interview. The reporter, whose name was Sarah Mitchell, came to my house on a Saturday morning. She was professional and thorough, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events, my motivations for fighting the parking citation, and the aftermath of Patricia's conviction. She also interviewed Helen and several other neighbors to get a complete picture of the community's transformation. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday paper in September with the headline, "From HOA Nightmare to Model Community: How One Resident's Fight Against a Parking Ticket Exposed Embezzlement and Sparked Reform." My phone started ringing almost immediately. Friends and former colleagues from all over the country had seen the story online and were reaching out. Some shared their own HOA horror stories. Others congratulated me on taking a stand. It was overwhelming but also validating. More importantly, the article sparked a larger conversation about HOA governance in Arizona. Several state legislators reached out to Helen and me about potential reforms to HOA laws, including stronger protections against retaliation and more stringent financial oversight requirements. In October, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee that was considering new HOA regulations. I sat at a table in front of a room full of legislators and told my story once again. The fire hydrant, the parking citation, the retaliation, and Patricia's eventual conviction for theft. The problem is not HOAs themselves, I told the committee. The problem is inadequate oversight and insufficient protections for homeowners who report concerns. Patricia Whitmore was able to steal over $100,000 because there was no independent audit requirement and no mechanism for homeowners to question financial decisions without fear of retaliation. Stronger laws would not prevent every case of corruption, but they would make it much harder to get away with and much easier for homeowners to hold bad actors accountable. The committee members asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in reform. Whether anything would actually change remained to be seen, but at least the conversation was happening. As the one-year anniversary of the recall election approached, Helen organized a community celebration. It was not explicitly about the recall or about Patricia's downfall, but everyone understood the significance. The party was held in the renovated community center with food trucks, a DJ, and activities for kids. I stood near the edge of the crowd, watching neighbors interact with genuine warmth and friendliness. The difference between this gathering and the contentious meetings of a year earlier was striking. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Frank Palmer came over to stand next to me. "Quite a change, huh? It really is. Sometimes I still cannot believe everything that happened." "You know what I think," Frank said, watching the crowd. "I think every community needs someone like you. Not someone who is looking for trouble, but someone who will not back down when they encounter injustice. Most people want to avoid conflict, even when something is clearly wrong. But if everyone stays silent, nothing ever changes." "I was not trying to be a hero, Frank. I was just pissed off about a parking ticket," he laughed. "Maybe that is the point. You were not trying to save the world. You were just trying to correct one specific injustice. But by doing that, by refusing to accept being punished for helping the community, you set off a chain reaction that fixed a whole lot of other problems. Maybe that is how real change happens. Not through grand gestures, but through ordinary people saying no to small injustices." His words stayed with me long after the party ended. Maybe he was right. Maybe systemic change did not require superheroes or martyrs. Maybe it just required ordinary people who were willing to stand up for what was right, even in small ways, even when it was uncomfortable. As November arrived and the weather finally cooled down, I found myself reflecting on the past year and a half. So much had changed, both in Saguaro Heights and in my own perspective. I had learned things about civic engagement, community organizing, and the legal system that I never would have learned otherwise. I had made genuine friendships with neighbors I might never have connected with if not for our shared fight against the old HOA board. Most importantly, I had learned that individual action mattered. One person clearing a fire hydrant, one person refusing to pay an unjust fine, one person insisting on accountability had been enough to change an entire community and inspire broader reforms. The fire hydrant that had started everything remained clear and accessible, inspected quarterly by the new board, and maintained carefully by the HOA's landscaping service. Every time I drove past it, I thought about that Saturday morning when I had grabbed my hedge trimmers and decided to spend a few hours doing what needed to be done. I could not have known then where that decision would lead. I could not have predicted Patricia's downfall, the board recall, the criminal investigation, or any of the broader impacts. I had just been a guy annoyed about overgrown landscaping and fire safety, trying to do the right thing. But that decision, that simple choice to act instead of ignoring the problem, had mattered more than I could have imagined. And that, I realized, was the lesson worth remembering. We never know how much our actions might matter. We never know what chain of events we might set in motion by standing up for what is right, by refusing to accept injustice, by choosing to act instead of looking away. The yellow envelope that had arrived in my mailbox 18 months earlier had seemed like a minor annoyance at the time. A parking ticket, nothing more. But it had become the catalyst for transformation, the spark that exposed corruption and galvanized a community to demand better. As I sat on my back patio one evening in late November, watching the sun set over the desert hills, I thought about all the people who had played a role in Saguaro Heights' transformation. Helen, who had organized the recall. Douglas, who had blown the whistle on Patricia's theft. Marcus, who had provided legal guidance and support. Fire Marshal Rodriguez, who had taken my complaint seriously and conducted a thorough inspection. All the neighbors who had signed petitions, attended meetings, and voted for change. It had not been a one-man crusade. It had been a community effort, sparked by one incident but sustained by many people working together toward a common goal. That was another important lesson. Individual action matters, but collective action changes systems. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. Board meeting next Thursday. We are voting on the budget for next year. You should come. Might be boring, but transparency matters. I smiled and texted back that I would be there. A year ago, the thought of voluntarily attending an HOA board meeting would have been laughable. Now, it felt like part of being a responsible community member. The holidays approached again, bringing with them another neighborhood lights contest and another season of community gatherings. This time, I was not a reluctant participant, but an engaged neighbor who actually looked forward to these events. On Christmas Eve, I found myself hosting a small gathering at my house. Marcus was there, along with Helen and her family, Frank Palmer, Douglas Chen, who had recently moved back to the neighborhood after taking a job in Phoenix, and several other neighbors who had become genuine friends over the past year. We talked and laughed late into the evening, sharing stories and making plans for the coming year. At one point, Helen raised her glass in a toast. To Keith, who taught us all that fighting for what is right is always worth it, even when it starts with something as ridiculous as a parking ticket. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt that tightness in my throat again. Not because I thought I deserved special recognition, but because these people, this community, had become genuinely important to me. What had started as a frustrating conflict had evolved into something meaningful and lasting. As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, Marcus pulled me aside. You know what I told my colleagues at the firm about your case? I told them it was the most satisfying legal work I have ever done, and I did not even charge for it. Helping you fight back against Patricia and watching this whole community transform has reminded me why I went to law school in the first place. To help people stand up against those who abuse power. I am glad I called you that first time. I do not think I could have navigated all of this without your help. You would have found a way. You are too stubborn not to, he grinned. But I am glad I could help, and I am glad our friendship has gotten stronger through all of this. After everyone left, I stood in my living room looking at the plaque my neighbors had given me the previous Christmas. The words still resonated. One person standing up for what is right can change everything. It was true, but it was also incomplete. One person could start the process, could be the catalyst, but real change required many people working together. It required community in the truest sense of the word. I thought about Patricia, currently serving her sentence in state prison. I felt no satisfaction in her punishment, no joy in her downfall. What I felt was relief that she could not hurt anyone else, relief that the community had been freed from her corruption, and hope that her conviction would deter others who might be tempted to abuse similar positions of power. The legal system had worked eventually. The checks and balances had functioned, even if it took longer than it should have. Justice had been served, and more importantly, the community had been healed and reformed in the process. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked out my bedroom window at the neighborhood. Houses decorated with holiday lights, streets quiet and peaceful, a community at rest. It looked almost the same as it had 18 months earlier, but everything was different. The fire hydrant on the corner of my property was visible even in the darkness, illuminated by a nearby street light. A small thing, really. Just a red post with connections for fire hoses. But it had become a symbol of something larger: the importance of safety, the value of civic responsibility, and the power of refusing to accept injustice. I had cleared that hydrant because it was the right thing to do. I had fought the parking citation because the punishment was unjust. I had not set out to transform a community or expose corruption or inspire HOA reform. But by simply insisting on basic fairness and following through when challenged, I had helped set all of those things in motion. The lesson, if there was one, was simple. Do what is right, even when it is inconvenient. Stand up for what you believe in, even when it is uncomfortable. Refuse to accept injustice, even when accepting it would be easier. And trust that your actions matter, even when you cannot see the full impact they might have. That fire hydrant had been my starting point. Clearing it had been a simple act of civic responsibility that spiraled into something much larger. But at its core, the whole saga had been about basic principles: safety, fairness, accountability, and the belief that communities work best when everyone has a voice, and those in power are held accountable for their actions. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the young couple who had come to my door months earlier, asking about the neighborhood. I hoped they had bought the house. I hoped they would become part of this community and help maintain the positive changes we had fought so hard to achieve. Because that was how good communities sustained themselves. By welcoming new members and passing on not just rules and regulations but values and principles. The story of Saguaro Heights and the fire hydrant parking citation had become something of a local legend. It would be told and retold, probably with embellishments and exaggerations, but at its heart would always be a simple truth. One person had refused to accept an unjust parking ticket, and that refusal had changed everything. And somewhere in Scottsdale, in HOA communities across the city and maybe beyond, other homeowners might hear that story and find the courage to stand up against their own HOA injustices. They might question financial decisions, report safety violations, or simply insist on being treated fairly. And each of those small acts of courage might spark their own transformations. That, I realized as sleep finally claimed me, was the real legacy of my fight with Patricia Whitmore and the old HOA board. Not just the changes in Saguaro Heights, but the possibility that our story might inspire others to demand better from their communities and hold those in power accountable. The fire hydrant on my property had been cleared. The community had been transformed. Justice had been served. and life in Saguaro Heights continued, better and brighter than before. That was enough. That was everything.